So, ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to be taking a shortened look at the Russia games and the Summit 72 series between Canada and USSR. Now, I've decided not to go over the first five games because I really don't think Canada was in shape. I don't think Canada was showing their best, even though in Game 5 they almost won the contest before a final collapse in the third period. Now, the first four games of the series were held in Canada, with Team Canada losing two of the four games, winning only one game in Toronto and tying in Winnipeg. Now, by the time he went to Russia, he had a disastrous exhibition trip to Sweden, which eventually led to players such as Vic Hatfield, Rick Martin, and Jocelyn Kevrema leaving the team because of what they felt was a lack of playing time. More players were supposedly, including Gilbert Perreault, but eventually he decided to stay but have a limited participation. We all know Marcel Dion, Brian Glenn, and a few others were disgruntled with a lack of playing time. By the time they got to Russia, they were playing in something called Luzhinsky Ice Rink. Now, it was a 14,000 seat capacity rink. In Game 5, where Canada pretty well not say had to win, it would have been heavier to the advantage to win. They led 3 nothing entering the third period and eventually led 4-1, but they gave up four straight goals against a team Russia that was very good in the comeback method. Now, to a lot of people, Canada was not in shape before they entered game five, and we're still having some what do you call win problems. Now, Parise, Jean Paul Parise, Bobby Clark, and Paul Henderson played a big factor in the game five loss, or the one the two periods. Henderson put them ahead 4-1 uh, in the third period, but again, like I said, the Russians scored four goals to win 5-4. Now, Team Canada had to win the final three games, and it had to be literally one game at a time. And the first game that they won was a really tough one. Game six probably ranks as one of the better defensive international games of all time. Canada won by a 3-2 victory. Now, because there was no scoring in the first period, it was pretty well fait accompli that Canada had scored first to win the game. But Lee Ackman scored the first goal at 1:12 of the second period. But Team Canada confidence didn't waver, and they eventually scored three goals in a less than 9 minute span to get 3-1 lead into the second intermission. Uh, Canada, actually, the big money player in this game was Dennis Hull, who flipped a rebound over Trajak to tie the game after Gilbert had capitalized on a Soviet giveaway. Now, the great Yvon Cornway then scored on the setup behind the net from Red Beardson, his former teammate, and then 15 seconds later, Henderson scored what turned out to be the winning third goal on a 30-foot slap shot. Even though Yakushev scored late in the second period in a power play, to finish the scoring, there was no scoring in the third period. Now, according to published reports, including Montreal Gazette, Ken Dryden and Brad Park really was a factor in Canada's favor. Um, uh, Dryden's personal losing streak against the Soviets, which dated back to his amateur career, and of course the two previous games of the series ended in this match. And Canada's penny killer was really strong with Stapleton and White and Savard and Mahovich really doing effective the job. Uh, but the factor happened in this game. They were getting a lot of penalties in Russia, and this started a disadvantage for Team Canada because they were pretty well playing on the shorthand throughout the most of the key periods in the match. Now, these are two names that you have to keep in consideration as well. Kampala and Bader, the two German referees for the games. Um, they really didn't like much Canada's style of play. Team Canada was handed 31 minutes of penalties during the game, while the Soviets only receiving two minors. Now, Espo complained after the game that the Soviets were basically doing a cheating factor, and one of the goals he said was The Soviets was the directly result of referee dropping the puck while he was talking to a teammate as a retaliation. He started to get the nickname Badder and Worser. Just remember these two guys, and they're going to continue in the series. Now, during Game Six, which I think was a turning point in the series, Valerie Harlamov, who's a great star for Team Russia, was targeted by the Team Canada for attention. And according to legend and according to John Ferguson, he kind of hinted to, Bobby Clark, you know, why don't you do something, take his ankle out. And Bobby Clark deliberately, which what I saw, track down Harlamov and give him a slash against his already sore ankle. And according to reports, broke it. Harlamov basically was ineffective for the rest of the contest and the rest of the series. Clark didn't get a game misconduct, but got a minor penalty for slashing, but did get a 10-minute misconduct. Um, John Ferguson has said, that was kind of the turning point. And Bobby Clark has said, it was Russia, it was war. We're doing everything to win. Now, according to the Soviet press, they pretty well point the finger at John Ferguson and Clark working together to um, take over. And this is what Ferguson said on the record. He said, I called Clark over to the bench. I looked at Harmeloff and said, I think he needs a tap in the ankle. I don't think that's what he said. According to Bobby Clark, he said, what are you breaking? He said, I didn't think twice about it because it was us versus them, and I tend to agree. I don't think Team Canada was looking to protect the Soviet players who were getting the advantage in the penalty minutes. And Clark agreed with writer Dick Meadows that it was a wicked two-hander, and he said, that's how we got into Flin Flon out of the juniors. Um, Even though some Canadian players called it a low point in the series, some people said it was necessary because Canada was trying to win. They weren't trying to be sportsmanlike. In my opinion, Bobby Clark was Bobby Clark. They didn't get him on the team because he was Ron Ellis or Paul Henderson or Roger O'Bear. He was there to be an instigator. And this really played out in Game 7. Because of all the bad feelings of Game 6, pass on to Game 7. Um, Canada won again by one goal margin with Henderson scoring the winner. Espo had another great game with 2 goals in the first period, and the teams were tied 2-2 after the first, and the second period were scoreless. In the third, Gilbert put the Canada ahead. Yakashev returned, but at 17:54, and probably one of the greatest games in goals in international history, Henderson fooled the Soviet defender and moved through 4 players to score a really impressive counter with about 2 minutes left. Um, After the game, Henderson said it's probably the one of the most personally satisfying goals of his life. But the big controversial incident, which, depending what tape you look at, some of the Canadian repeats of the series show it, but some do not. And I've seen it, and I think it happened twice actually. The most controversial incident of the game actually came a minute before the winning goal when a scuffle broke out between Gary Bergman and USSR number 13, the evil Boris Mikhailov. Um, in my view, and the view of a lot of people, Mikhailov kicked Bergman twice before the scuffle ended. And like Gary Bergman says later on, there's no kicking in hockey. Now, the Czech referee Rudolf Bada and Swedish referee Ulf Dahlberg officiated the match, and they were chastised for not giving Canada enough penalties in the game as compared to Game 6. And the Russians basically forced the hand by sending both referees home. And uh, Bergman basically could have got a game of stars and same Mihailov, but it played off in Game 8. Um, the controversy arose where basically he said if Bergman keeps quiet, you can have those referees, and he reneged on it. And the Soviets want to put Bader and Gapala back in. Um, the whole game was played pretty well under protest, but Heading into the contest, we were tied. 3 games to 3 were one tie. And the Russians were claiming if they would tie game 8, they would win the series on goal differential. Now, Canada would never have that. Now, according to statistics at the time, it was the most watched sporting event in the history of Canadian television. Some people say the 2010 Olympic game was the highest one. I don't believe that because pure numbers is that there was, 20 million Canadians in 1972, probably 14 or 15 million was watching. Schools, the TVs were brought to schools, nursing homes, hospitals, everybody was watching. Um, but it started off with a lot of drama because like I said, the Russian-led referees gave Team Canada a bunch of questionable penalties. First it was Bill White, then was Peter Mahovlich, then Yakushev scored to give the USSR a 1-0 lead. Now, the third penalty against J.P. Parise, which I saw as a cross-checking, but it was called interference, emotions really bowled over. Parise was called for 10-minute misconduct for challenging the call by banging a stick in the ice. And when he saw the misconduct called, he raced across the ice and was said he was or tried. He said he was going to slash him. Uh, Parise, who was basically a very quiet player from Minnesota, compared to a Steve Shutt, he nearly swung his stick in Kampala and got a match penalty. Then Harry Senden and probably predated Bobby Knight by a number of years threw a chair on the ice. But some people felt it was done with a good purpose because the game was pretty well even from a penalty standpoint. And, Team Canada was getting fed up. And they were chanting in the audience a famous chant that everybody knows, let's go home, let's go home. Because there were thousands of Canadians in Luzhniki that were basically doing everything to promote the fact that every time the Soviet-led referees were making mistakes, they were called out. Now, when Parise's penalty was served in the misconduct, it was Canada's turn to go on a power play, and Espo scored his sixth goal of the series to tie it at 1-1. They exchanged power play goals before Lushenko scored a power play goal to put the Soviets ahead. Brad Park then responded for a tie, and the period ended with a 2-2 score. In the second, the Soviets went ahead by a goal by Shadron after 21 seconds. And the last 10 minutes again saw two more goals from the Soviets. Yakushev scored his seventh of the series, followed by Vasiliev on a power play, put the Soviets up 3-2, 5-3 after two periods. Um, Now, White had countered for Canada midway through the period, and if this was, of course, one of the few moments that Canada had to cheer on because the Soviets dominated. Um, the other was a goal-saving play by Esposito, who stopped a shot by Blinov, who had fake Dryden out and had anything to shoot to. Blinov was denied by Esposito, who stopped the puck with his stick on the goal line. And this would have put the game out of reach because it was 5-3 going into final period. Now, early on in the period, Esposito scored, and then Cornway scored to even up at 5-5. But after the Cornway goal, the goal judge refused to put the light on, despite the fact it was signal a goal on the ice. Now, in response, the since disgraced Alan Eagleton, who was running Team Canada's management at the time, seated across from the Team Canada bench, attempted to reach the Timers bench to protest, causing a ruckus in the crowd that he made his way to the Timers bench. This caused the members of the Russian army to put a pretty well a stranglehold on Eagleton. When the police were trying to take away the Canadian players headed over, and get this, Peter Mahovlich jumped off the board just with his stick to confront police by slashing back and forth. Eagleton was eventually freed, and he was escorted back to Team Canada bench with him and the rest of the Team Canada reps doing, the number one finger, the middle finger, and the old Italian salute. It was completely out of hand. But you got to understand this. If the United States were playing Russia in baseball, that's the only comparison. It's like cheating in baseball in Canada. The Americans would go off the field and give the hometown Soviets the finger. This was so much a Cold War series that if you watched it as a non-Canadian, you're saying, "What the hell is going on here?" Now, as the switch sides at the 10-minute mark, um, Bergman had missed pretty well an empty net. Bergman could have scored the winning goal because we all know what's going to happen next. Bergman, I think he had about 2 feet in the shot. He just missed barely. And when less than a minute left, Esposito and Conway and Mahavich were out in the ice. And for some reason, then Henderson later on, he felt the voice telling him, you got to get back in the game. He stood up on the bench and called Mahavich off the ice, and he went straight for the net. He said, I had this strange feeling that I could score the winning goal. Now, Clark was supposed to replace Esposito, but Phil didn't come off, and like Esposito said later on, there was no way it was coming off when a situation like that. Cornway picked up the puck that had been passed around the boards for the Soviets. He missed Henderson with a pass, but two Soviets mishandled the puck in the corner, and Esposito shot the puck on Trechak. Second rebound, Henderson got it after falling behind the net, the famous fall before the big goal. I think he stopped Henderson twice, but on the third attempt, he put it in with 34 seconds the goal and led to the most infamous pro Canadian sports photo of all time. Now, the scene was captured in the film by cameraman Frank Lennon, and the picture still is very iconic in Canada. And uh, the rest of the game was just pretty well the Russians were demoralized. Canada just ran out the clock. But four things really stand out in the last game. Espo had probably one of the greatest games of his career. He got 2 goals and 2 assists in the game, and he had a goal and 2 assists in the third period. Um, and he was the only player neither team could stop. Espo was the only player in either team to score 4 points in a game during the series. Some hockey experts, including players like Ron Ellis, says the greatest period you've ever seen for any hockey player in the history of the world, and Sinden considered it Esposito's finest hour. And Esposito said in published reports and TV reports, he said, I would have killed the win. He said, literally, I would have killed him. Now, after an exhibition game in Czechoslovakia, they ended up going back to Canada. They left as zeros and came back as heroes. And the series itself probably started the whole anti-Russia hockey level to hockey to the next level. After then, we had more incidents of the bad refereeing in Russia being called out, the bad play of the Europeans, the stick play, especially what happened in Sweden. The Canadian old-time hockey style was starting to diminish, while the skilled style of the WHA and the European leagues were starting to get more recognition and more imitation. But for me, as a 7-year-old person in 1972, and I've watched the series over and over again through the years, um, Team Canada was way better in Russia in '72. I don't think the right players or the right mix of players was chosen. People like Mickey Redmond and Red Berenson and Bill Goldsworthy and Dale Talon and Brian Glennie, Eddie Johnson, you could have done it much better. But the key part was, ladies and gentlemen, Bobby Orr was injured. If Bobby Orr would have played in any of the games in '72, like he played Canada Cup in '76, he would have won every one of those games. For example, players that were not chosen. Jacques Lemaire could have done a great effort. Dave Keon would have been tremendous on that team. Gordie Howe was already retired. Gordie played in some in '74. Bobby Hull wasn't allowed to play. Jacques Plante would have worked as a better backup than Johnson, any shape or form. You had a lot of great young talent. Gilbert Perreault wasn't given really a chance to play. Marcel Dion was never given a chance to play in this series. So if you remember this, there was about 9 or 10 American players that could have played for a team NHL in the series, but he wanted to keep a Team Canada. There was some good American players could have played, on part of Team Canada. But again, no Jerry Cheevers said the WHA. None of the WHA were eligible, like J.C. Tremblay as well. You could have 15 or 20 other players. Creasy didn't deserve to be there as well. Dennis and Bobby Hull in the same line. Like I said, the mind speculates. So the factor was he chose the wrong players and the wrong time to have the series. If he would have had the series in a 2 week break during the NHL season, maybe in October, November, you would see a much different. I think the Russians were good enough to win 2 to 6 games, and they won three. Uh, I really think that the personalities of the players, Frank and Peter Mahovlich and a few others, some were taking it too serious and not seriously enough. Oh yeah, another thing too as well. Wayne Cashman, who was injured in Sweden, didn't play in Russia. And this is kind of bizarre. He won 3 out of 4 games in Russia, could have won all four. Like I said, I basically think I look at the rosters at a time. The 1976 Canada Cup team and the 1981 Canada Cup team for Russia was a little bit better than 72. Tretiak was still learning. I think Tretiak got better as the years went on, and the Challenge Cup win proves it. 81 proves it. The World Championships. The 1980 USA win the Olympics was just a misnomer. So, Tretiak only had really one bad period, and he was taken out. So hockey's a lot of woulda, shoulda, coulda. So here's the deal, ladies and gentlemen. The DVDs of the series in '72 are available. It's on YouTube as well. It's a it's it's a big watch. It's literally, if I'm not mistaken, the 8 game series plus the exhibition games would rank at 30 hours. So there's a lot going on. But like I said, the third and fourth line players that were chosen, and I think it was more NHLPA of anything else. But some people were complaining that Paul Anderson was chosen, and but the question is, for example, if John Beliveau was still playing or came out of retirement, who else going to think here? Bernie Perron was a good goalie prospect at the time. Hey, Daryl Sittler. Hmm. Imagine Daryl Sittler with Team Canada. You know, he never had any high level amateur pros like Eric Lindros on this team. And, it all depends who he wanted. Like I said, there was a whole bunch of Toronto Maple Leafs. He had a lot of elite players, but you know, Ricky McClish. Anyway, just on and on. You could do another Team Canada, but you needed Esposito. You needed Cornway. You needed someone that could score like Henderson, like finish off the play. A lot of skilled players, but defensemen like Pat Stapleton, no mobility at all. Don Orey was selected for this team as well. Thank God he never played. So anyway, so games 6 and 7 and 8. If you're a Canadian, if you're confined with the stress this week, but the whole situation, you do worse to watch it over again if your heart can take it. Because even now, 48 years later, I still wonder as a nation where we were over this. Oh yeah, by the way, before I let you go, the NFC documentary on the last Game 8, where different people across Canada are being filmed while it's going on. Diefenbaker, WHA players in training camp, George Chuvalo, the boxing champion. It's quite interesting. But there's a very famous line in the American podcast followers will ever get this. One very famous Canadian entertainer said this was a triumph of white magic over black magic. And another one said, God must be Canadian because he allowed us to beat the Russians in Russia while they were cheating and while they were doing everything to bring down Canadian hockey. I can tell you for a fact, I'm a Christian. God is Canadian. God is not American. Never was and never will be. By the way, if you want to have a little debate with me why I think God is Canadian, because God is a loving God. We wouldn't be taking masks away from our neighbors for the sake of political expediency. That's a sign of somebody that basically might worship somebody else much more lower in the earth. If you, but if you're an atheist, it doesn't really apply to you. But if an atheist, I don't want you watching Team Canada because God is Canadian. If you're an atheist, you must be an American or should be. Go Canada Go only became Go Canada Go with this series. You know, the USA chant didn't start with you guys. You ripped us off with Go Canada Go. Watch it tape. You'll see what I'm talking about. Sounds very familiar. And the worst part about this, Roger Doucette as well, when he used to play the anthem, he wrote the Russian national anthem lyrics, by the way. That was another part of it. And Foster, you would announcing this? Terrible. Danny Galvin or Rennie Lecavalier. Much better. Anyway. Have a good day. Where were you in '72?